Hi, I'm Michael Croker, and this is Park Life. I've worked in the Australian theme park industry for a little over 30 years, and in this podcast series, I spend time in conversation with the people inside the business of making memories. Thanks for joining me. I hope you can subscribe, rate, and review. Enjoy the ride. Lynne Benzie has an amazing story to tell. She well deserves the great reputation she has around the world of big movie making. As the president of Village Roadshow Studios on Queensland's Gold Coast, she has been a force of nature in steering Australia toward the premier filmmaking location it is seen as today. We sat down together on the studio lot and talked a little about her inspiring life. So Lynne, thank you for joining us here on Park Life. It's great to have your company.
Thank you.
If we could just jump back, there's one thing I'd be interested to know about you in the role that you have currently. Can you recall the first cinematic experience you ever had?
Probably the one that stuck in my mind was Sound of Music, which was in Leeds in Yorkshire where I was born. I remember my mum and dad taking me to a Saturday matinee and watching it at the Odeon cinema.
And can you recall if that had an impact on you?
No.
Was there a film along the journey in your years of youth that really hit you in terms of film?
The one that and I can watch it to this day is Ben-Hur with Charlton Heston. I remember because that's where the saying comes from, bigger than Ben-Hur, because it's the longest cinematic movie ever made. And I remember we had an intermission in the middle of it. But I can still watch that movie to this day. It's just a classic movie. I love the old movies. They're Gone with the Wind, but that Ben-Hur's always stuck in my head. Yeah. I can't say it was a light bulb moment that wanted me to work in film. It was just, for me, back then, I think probably was 7 maybe, I think. It was just visually something I'd never seen before. Yeah. But I've always loved the old movies, Anthony and Cleopatra, Gone with the Wind and all those ones. I could watch them even now when they have them on the TV. I love watching them. It
seemed that era had boundless ambition, that there were no boundaries.
No.
They were so big.
Yeah, because at the time as well then the Beatles had started to come when I was like 5. My sister and I used to go to a Saturday disco that went from like 9 till 11. Your mum and dad would drop you off and all the kids running around and the Beatles were playing, and then their movies started to come out, like Hard Day's Night, and I remember going to see them as well. And so I think it's an era, I think we were lucky that we were able to go through that. I think people miss so much in this day and age of seeing that old school come through.
I don't know if it's the same experience for you. I remember hearing an interview with, I think it might have been Paul McCartney, talking about it felt like coming out of post-war Britain, that everything immediately was in black and white, and then all of a sudden when the 60s hit, that there was colour.
Yeah.
And that seemed to happen in popular culture with film and with music. Did you have a sense that the world was changing even as a young girl? Was there a sense that things were...
Yeah, and it's funny because I always remember my sister bought me a DVD, which don't exist anymore, on the year I was born, and everything was in black and white. It was the first radio communication between London and Edinburgh. Elvis had just started. So when I watched that video, everything's in black and white. And you're right, then as, by 5 or 6 we had black and white TV. And you're right, everything started becoming in colour and you were more interested in things because you'd look at TV, seeing that person. And then when the colour came out, you had no idea that person had red hair or, and how it changed that way. But it was nothing to do with the job that I've got now. It was just... I think an era back then, it changed so quickly and moved so fast.
Can I ask, what lines of work were mum and dad in?
My mum and dad originally was in the Navy. He left Scotland a year younger than he was supposed to and went in the Navy, and he was in the Navy for a couple of years. My mum met my dad when they were down, because the naval base is down in Portsmouth in England, and that's where my dad met my mum. He totally fell in. First girlfriend he'd ever had. Totally fell in love with her. I had my sister, my half sister, which is to my mum's side, and then I came along, and and after that he left the Navy. There's photos I remember, and I obviously was too young, that they lived in Scotland for a while with his sister. Then they went back to Leeds, and my dad worked in engineering. And then my mum worked for an audio company that used to make all the turntables and the speakers. So they used to do all the audio equipment back then and all the decking gear. And we used to go out and do if we were a Saturday job or after school, we used to go and then glue all the vinyl on the cabinets with the wood glue.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's just, yeah.
And did you have the one sister?
Yes, I've only got one sister, yeah.
So what was one of the first jobs when you were in the workforce? Can you remember what you were doing?
I do. My mum and dad always had a rule that if I was still to get pocket money, even though I was old enough to work, I had to go get a Saturday job. So I worked in a shoe shop. So maybe that's where my love of shoes have come from, but I sucked at it because somebody would come in and say, I need this shoe. I'd go in the back and just stand there and come back out 5 minutes later saying, I can't find it.
Why weren't you looking for the shoes?
Yeah, and unfortunately then one day somebody asked the shoes I had on, I really liked them, so I told them I got them from the shop up the road and the manager was behind me and I got fired.
Wow.
So it was like, well, okay, I learnt that lesson.
And how long were you living in England before you eventually made your way to Australia, and what led to that?
I came out in 1980, so my sister and a group of her friends always used to go to Newquay, Bournemouth, Isle of Man for the season. Then they come back home, and then one year they all decided, let's all go to Australia. So I think there was 5 of them that came out, so they all travelled to Sydney. I was engaged, funnily enough, back then at 20. Why you would, I've got no idea, but obviously back then, that's what you used to do. And my mum said one day, just go over for a holiday, because my engagement had finished, and I went, no, I don't want to go, no, go, and I did. It was £400 return. Went for 6 months, 7 months, and never went back.
Never went back?
No. I got back on holiday, obviously, but no. I came to Sydney. I remember it was the longest flight I'd ever been on, and terrified because I'd never been on a plane that big either. It was just 1 month before my 21st birthday. So there was a whole funny thing flying on the plane for so long. I refused to go to the toilet on the plane because the old couple next to me asked me why. I said, but I could get sucked out and nobody knew I'd gone missing, then you'd have to tell my sister at the other end. So how naive you were back then is hysterical. And lived in Manly for a couple of years. My sister and I, one of my girlfriends came over from the UK for a holiday. We hired at Holden Kingswood.
Yes.
And went and travelled up north for 3 months. So on the Gold Coast, we stayed at the Caravan Park, which is now the casino. We went all the way to Cairns, lived in Ellie Beach for a while.
A working holiday? It
was, yes. Well, originally for me it was just a holiday, and then we stayed on the Gold Coast for about, I think, 3 months from memory, and I got a job in doing waitressing, and so did my sister, my other friend did as well. So we were living in the Caravan Park where the casino is.
Well, just to jump back a bit, when you said you came to Australia and never went back, and Mum had said, go over and have a holiday, and then, I guess we'll see you when you get back. Yeah. What was the reaction when you made the decision to not go back? How were Mum and Dad about that?
Well, I think because I was originally only on a 7 months holiday visa, and then I applied in Sydney to get a working visa, and they said normally they don't give you one unless you've been here a year. But at that time, immigration was a bit easier to work with and it wasn't expensive. So they extended it for 6 months as a working holiday, so they were happy for me to stay. But my mum and dad actually came out for a holiday, probably about 8 months after I got here. They absolutely loved it. They were going to emigrate. I got my dad a job in Sydney to do the same engineering work that he was doing in the UK. Got approved by immigration, they were all going to travel out, and sadly they got accepted 6 months later. My mum had a stroke, a very, very bad one. They'd sold all the furniture, given the dog away.
Wow. And
you get a year at the time when your visa's accepted to decide if you can come. So they kept waiting, but my mum she was really bad. So unfortunately, they couldn't come and emigrate. They were so close, it was very sad. But they still came for holidays. Once my mum settled down, they came back, I think, about twice before it got too tricky. But, it was such a shame because they would have been here. Yeah.
So on the back of that holiday, what takes you into the workforce in Australia? Where do you end up?
I think when I was in Sydney to start with, I worked for a finance company called Custom Credit, which is finance. And I did PA work back in the UK because I worked in an engineering firm. And in the UK company, I ended up buying all the steel for the company. So I used to buy all the steel for all the gear that they used to make over there. So when I came to Australia, I'd done PR work or PA work. secretary. And I worked for Custom Credit for a couple of months. We then travelled away with my sister up north and did waitressing. Went back to Sydney. What did I do after that? Oh, and I think I met my ex-husband at the time.
Can I just ask you, what's driving you as a young person here? Because there's clearly a fire in your belly, and there's some fearlessness as well, and you're rolling the dice on yourself at a very young age. When you look back, do you have a sense of where that came from? Because obviously the journey is still going at this point, but it seems to be a pattern that you're not afraid to step out, back yourself and move.
Well, it's weird because I'd never left home, and I did not want to come to Australia, but my sister was here, and I think having my sister here made a big difference.
Yeah.
Eventually, when my mum got really sick, my sister did go back, but back then at the time I was married, so I was happy to stay here. But even when that all changed, I think I'd spent so much time in Australia. I found, and when I used to go back, it was quite funny because you didn't belong there, because you got the doctors, but you couldn't use your social security number. You had to fill a form to say you don't live here anymore, and it was strange because I think, well, I've spent half my life there, and I just think I'd settled here. I had a good job in Sydney at the time, working for EMI Records. Went to Melbourne for a couple of years, but I was still married at that time. And then came up to the Gold Coast because I did work for World Expo 88.
I'm just going to hold you there for a minute, because that's a big jump. How do you move from the initial work you were doing into EMI Records? Because they're not even complementary industries. So how does that happen?
No, I got, I remember there was a PA role. The sales manager was looking for a PA. I applied for it because that's what I did. And I'd had odd jobs in between. I'd done receptionist, and because I worked in building industry back in the UK, a job came up for a PA working for the sales manager. Went and worked for EMI. Was there for 4 years. I did eventually get promoted to working with one of the executives up on they called it the second floor, so I migrated a bit further up the food. I started on the ground floor. I went on the first floor when the sales department moved. I went up to the executive area and was with them, I think, for about a year. But that was a massive eye-opener.
It was a scene.
It was a scene. It was like...
What era are we talking?
I was at EMI... I came in 80, I would have said been between 81 and 85.
Right.
So it was still at Castlereagh Street before it moved.
Yeah.
And I'd done PR work, but it's a whole different culture I'd never experienced. It was amazing. I mean, seeing all, to go out for dinner with Freddie Mercury and Queen, and to sit, just to sit across from them. My bosses had me sit in the middle. I wasn't invited at the time, and I kicked up a stink. They said, "Oh, they just want single girls to go," and I said, "I am going, no matter what you do. I am going to go." But to meet all those people, and then with Grace Jones and all those people that used to come out, because the PR department was next to where my boss used to be. So we used to we go, and you go to all the concerts with David Bowie and see all them. So it was a massive, massive culture change, and I loved it. And they used to do conferences every year, and they were entertaining because they used to do shows at the end, and all the girls used to do a skit, and all the sales managers used to do one. So it's a massive, massive eye-opener. When I moved to Melbourne, because my school friend came out and she moved to Melbourne at the time, when I left EMI, it was very hard to get it out of my system because it's so dynamic, it was so different, it was unusual.
What prompted you to leave?
I'd gone to see my school friend in Melbourne, and where they lived in Sunbury, there were blocks of land selling for like 15,000.
Wow.
So we just went, well, we can't pass this up, it's so cheap. Went down there, built a house. I ended up working for John Fairfax, Simon Information Technology, who then did, they won the contract for World Expo 88 doing all the touch screens. And they had all this gear there, but nobody knew how to use it. Because I'd been a bit bored, I'd been playing around with it.
Right.
So when they got the contract, they went, well, there was another girl there, Lisa, who knew it really well. And they said, well, you two can both work together and you can design all the touch screens that were on World Expo 88. I had no idea what I was doing.
So how did you manage to do that with no formal background in the tech?
I remember the machine was in the office, and then I used to just play, what happens if I draw this little picture, what happens? And if you saw the technology back then, it's hysterical, not like now. And then it transposed in, and we did animation, we did research on the colours that people like to look at. And Lisa, who knew that side of it really well. And we just worked together and designed all the pages. And don't ask me how I worked it out, I've got no idea, but creatively, and you know, we had to do research of, you know, the information pages, what you're looking for. Then we had to convert it into Japanese and Chinese, and animate some of the people quite rudely probably back then. And yeah, and then I came up for World Expo. It was absolutely amazing. The weather was just phenomenal. And went, I can't live in Melbourne anymore. It's really cold. I love it. The culture is amazing, but it was cold every year. I had on my winter gear, and I just went, after coming up to Queensland, I went, nah, that's it.
So there's a pattern of not second guessing yourself. I'm just curious, again, never at any point you seem to be second guessing what you might be able to do.
Honestly, I don't know. I can't explain. Like, even when I worked in the UK, I used to work in the typing pool. Then how I went from that to working with the buyer who used to buy all the steel for the coal mine locomotives who used to build, then he left. And they just said, you just keep doing it all. So I was buying all this stuff. And then when I came to Australia, I did reception work, I've done waitressing, I've done, mainly my background was PA secretary. And I just, when I first came to Australia, I said, I'll do any job, it doesn't worry me. I've done data entry at Boys Town before I got the job here at the studio. And it's just, I can't explain it. I just seem to be very, very lucky in some of the jobs that I've come across.
Did you have mentorship at key points along the way, or were you kind of left to your own devices?
Not really, yeah, I was left to my own devices. I mean, there was people that I work with that I'm always one of these things, like whoever I work for, I've got the best hearing on the planet. You ask my staff, it annoys them so much, I can hear anything. So I'd be at my desk doing my work, but I could be listening to my boss talking to people in the office what he's doing. Back then when you get the fax, I used to read every fax that came in, so I knew what he was talking about. I can't explain it, but it was just that intuition, that...
But there's obviously an inquiring mind there too, because you're describing someone that's wanting to take in information and knowledge. And then turn that into an action.
Yeah, that's right. And I've been very lucky, I think, the jobs that I've done. I mean, like when I've even done waitressing doing weddings, which I did on the Gold Coast when I couldn't get a job. And as I said, before I got this job, I was doing data entry on Boys Town. Because I used to be able to type really, really fast as well. Absolutely rubbish at shorthand. I did go to business college in the UK, and I could not master shorthand for the life of me.
It sounds like you were never too proud to not do what you had to do.
Yeah, because I think, and also, like, I look at, to me, the more I do, I don't think I could have done the jobs that I've done over the years, that I wasn't so diverse. And working in engineering, that technical side of it, working in marketing and seeing how that works, working at EMI with the commercials and, meeting all those guys and how they work. So I think a combination of all them put together enables me, I think, to get where I am today. Just a one-man band.
What comes on the back of Expo?
We went back to Melbourne, then we sold the house, moved up here. Then I worked for a building company called, what was it called? Something Exhibition. Used to make furniture, bedroom furniture, and they did the Oasis at Broadbeach. There used to be a butterfly that used to fly around the roof on a track rail. That was
part of their branding, if I remember.
Yes.
Nikon Plaza, I think
it was,
wasn't
it was. Yeah. And I worked for the company that designed all of that. And then, but that was when that was just built, and then they put the butterfly that used to fly around, and I worked with them. I was promoted to manager, but then the company got made redundant and closed down, and then I was doing some work at Royal Pines doing the weddings in restaurants. And then this job hadn't come up, and I was doing Boys Town data entry. I was doing it for about 2 weeks. So you can blame me for all the mail that everybody gets now, probably.
Again and again.
Yeah, again, yeah.
Were there dreams, like when you're doing a gig like that, were there dreams, or were there aspirations beyond? Or it seems like you're in the moment, you give everything you've got in the moment in the role that you have, and then you expand on that, and then you move on to the next thing. But was there an overriding ambition and a dream, a vision you had?
Well, no, it's funny. There wasn't. I mean, I went to, my parents paid for me to go to business school, which we did commerce and shorthand and typing as you did back then, and and they couldn't afford for me to go, but they managed to to put it together. But I just think I've been really, really lucky that most jobs that have come up, that I've embraced it to learn from it, and knowing it's another feather in my cap for being able to move on. And then when this job came up as originally as the PA to Michael Lake, I had all those attributes. I'd done marketing, I'd done PR work, I worked in engineering, I knew how to concreting, I knew how to build a building, and it just all meshed together to end up working for here for 30 years.
I'm sure that's a good place to be at. I'm sure there would be people listening wondering, how do you move from data entering for Boys Town, and if you jump ahead and you're now the president of Village Roadshow Studios on the Gold Coast. How does that happen?
It's a hard one because a lot of people have asked me that, and I honestly, I think the one thing I've always learned over the years, no matter what my job is, I will do it to the 10th degree. If I did waitressing, why does it work that way? How's the kitchen work? Why do you do it that way? And I've done some mindless jobs, but they've all had that little bit that contributed to me with my knowledge. So, Boys Town, I'm doing that. It was just a fluke that this job came up as a PA, because I was looking for work at the time through an agency.
Can we talk about that? What was that job specifically? It was PA for...
Well, it was, I think when the building company got made redundant, I went to doing Boys Town, because at that time I was just looking for work, and it was originally secretary / PA, and I'd done the PA level on a lot higher scale, and then this job came up working for Michael Lake.
And what was Michael's role at the time?
He, because the studio was built in '86, and originally it wasn't owned by Village until 1988. Dina De Laurentiis built it, and they had Stanley O'Toole running it. But then when Village took it over, they'd approached Nick McMahon and Michael Lake, who work at Crawford's, to come up. They were doing Earth Force, I think it was here, or not Skippy came later. And then Village approached them to come up to run the studio. So Nick focused on TV when he did Pacific Drive and Paradise Beach.
I had a small role in Pacific Drive.
We've still got the poster hanging around.
I had a very small role. I played a villain. It was obviously a soap opera in the 90s. I played a character called Jock Andrews, and I was in a full season. And the audition was for one line, and I came here for the audition, and I drove for almost an hour to get to the casting for one line, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to improvise. So I did the one line, but I gave it a monologue. I put it in the middle of a monologue. Yeah. And I thought I'll just take a risk. And the casting directors looking at each other, having a bit of a laugh, and then I got the call from the agent. No, they like you. In fact, they're going to give you more than the one line. Yeah. So Pacific Drive it was. For those that don't know, can we just go back in time to that period? What was the studio lot then? What did it look like?
Because I know they'd already done Delinquents with Kylie Minogue. They'd done Blood Moon, Blood Oath, and they were doing what they called back then the Silver Series. So when Michael started and I came for the interview, there was no theme park. There was no houses, there was no Studio Village.
That's right.
There was no... Wet n Wild was here, because Wet n Wild been here for years.
But no Warner Brothers Movie World and...
No houses, no shops, no McDonald's across the road. So you either brought your lunch, or you'd have to go to Naran, which was, 45 minutes to an hour, because there's no motorway.
How many sound stages on the lot?
They just... When it was first built, it was 4 stages. They just finished stage 5 when I started in 1990. And they were just putting furniture in. And that was the first one that had the tank in the floor. And the very first feature that we got was a movie that we were really well known for doing Movie of the Weeks back then, which is a bit like the Netflix projects. There used to be a 6-week 4-week shoot, 2-week wrap, and they were done. The budgets used to be about 5 million, and we constantly used to do them. And the first one that used stage 5 was a Von Zernick-Sertner project called Survive the Savage Sea. And then the first feature film I remember when I started was Fortress with Christopher Lambert. Very excited. Yeah. Because I'd never seen a film, didn't realise how it worked, didn't realise how many takes they do on set. Yeah. And to go on set and then see the editing and...
And now this is where that inquiring mind of yours probably takes over, and you're asking yourself, how?
Yeah.
how's that work and why they're doing that, and I imagine you're feeding all of that into yourself.
Yeah, and because we're like, and because really we are a landlord in effect, that we are a dry hire facility, so we actually don't physically make the movies. So all the crew that come in and all the gear that they hire, they're freelance companies, so they bring it all in. But Michael at the time set up with, got Panavision to set up with cameras. Back then we had a Film Lab, which is back then called ATLab. Then we had Photon, which is a visual effects company. We had Show Travel, who was a Sydney-based company. They came up and based themselves here. So what Michael tried to do was create a one-stop shop. So you get everything here, and you don't have to go find it anywhere else.
Can I just ask you then, what came first? Was it a case of build it and they will come, or was there a sense that there's untapped potential, and there's product and there's projects but no facility? Because it's a very bold move to say, let's put a studio lot in what was essentially bushland at that time.
It was the
Gold Coast.
It was a farmland.
What drove an initiative like that? Was it knowing that there's potential, that there's work?
I mean, I've looked at the old. We found some old newspaper clippings to work out why De Laurentiis at the time did a deal with the government. He got a very low interest loan, and if you look at old pictures that we have here, it is literally stuck in the middle of nowhere. But the first one off Cab Rank he was going to do was Total Recall with Patrick Swayze, which then didn't happen. And then he did Wim Wenders Till the End of the Earth, I think it was called. But then Village, when he took it on in '88, they did then the Silver Series. But there's nothing I can find that says why on earth did he stick it in the middle of, there was no industry, there was no crew. And through Michael, she had work of working together to get on-site tenants. Then the crew started to come up, like Donald Sheen and Jeff Hayes started to move up because Nick and Michael knew them really well. Then the crew started to move up to the Gold Coast. So it was, I mean, it did definitely had an industry here, but not on the level that we had as years progressed.
What was that like with Michael? What was your dynamic like with him? Did that relationship professionally develop in a way that you could be around and in conversations and dealings at a high level, that you were taking in understandings of the machinations behind the scenes?
Yeah, I think because I know when Michael interviewed me, I just got on with him really, really well. And I just had this knack, I was always 9 steps ahead of him. A lot of the time. He caught me out a few times, but most of the time I just knew how he thought. I knew what he wanted, and as time went by, he slowly got me to, because of being a producer, they're so used to doing it all themselves, and I used to say to him, let me do some of the work, because, you know, you go out and market the studio, but I can run it. So, you know, running the air conditioning, the toilets and everything else, and having to learn how the air conditioning works, how the soundstage works, how it all works inside, the IT, the network, and then just slowly just let me kind of look after that side of it while he focused on marketing and selling the studio to overseas, and used to travel quite a bit overseas as well. But I just had this knack with him, always 9 steps ahead of him. I just knew how he thought. So I was very, very lucky. And
he sounds like someone that was inviting to you rather than sort of blocking off from how things are. It sounds like he was happy to bring you into how all that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You know, and again, it come down, I think, a lot to when he was here again. I could hear these conversations on the phone, even through a door. I could still hear.
That's the pattern.
Yeah. I'd read all back then faxes and no such thing as emails and all of that stuff, and he went on to produce a couple of films that were based here anyway. So a lot of times he'd go do that, and then he'd just say, "Oh, well, just, you know, keep going and keep what you're doing." But like the role I've got now, I do it all. I do Michael's role as well as still manage the site as well. But it's my curiosity of the questions that kept coming up, and because I've worked in legal, which I missed, I used to work for a law company up in Airlie Beach.
Right.
Because I lived in Airlie Beach for about 3 months.
Yeah.
And through my legal background, I used to then do all the contracts. But then the questions that kept coming up all the time, I just said, well, why is it doing that? Why is it working the way it does? I need to understand it. Yes. So then if somebody asks me in future, I can say, well, it works this way because of that. This is what the chain blocks do. This is what the soundproofing does. So when we then built and expanded with stage 6 and stage 7 and 8, I was heavily project management involved with it, on making sure it was built right and doing all that side of it as well, and under budget.
Under budget every time.
Most of the time.
How long was that partnership with Michael before Michael moved on to something else?
Michael, wow, he ended up moving to LA, still working for Village, because Village have an office in LA and still does to this day. I think I've been with him for 9 years. Then he went to LA, and still the figure of the studio, but then they just let Village and Michael just let me carry on doing what I was doing here. Then he was over there, I'm only guessing now, maybe 5 years, 4 years, because all his family moved over there and everything. And then he left because WWE did 3 films here, the wrestling, and he ended up producing some of them, and then they asked him to go and work for them to do more movies back to LA. So then he left the Village facility and then went back to LA for a couple of years, but back then he'd moved on from. But I've never forgotten though, and I've always wound him up on this. Friday afternoon, I think it was about 3 o'clock, and he said to me, just to let you know I'm leaving and I won't be here on Monday. Wow. And I went, so it's 3 o'clock now and you're going to leave at 5 or 6 and then come Monday morning you're not going to come back? He said, no. I was like, oh no, don't worry, I've told Village, they're fine with it and they're happy for you to take it all on. And it was like, wow. So obviously he had faith in me that I knew I could do it.
So the conversation was led by him letting you know that this has already been determined and they're happy for you to slot into that role? Yeah. So how did you initially react to that idea?
I'm allowed to swear?
Yeah.
I nearly shit myself.
That's perfect.
Or like, because I mean, he's probably my biggest mentor for sure, because he was able to let me take on jobs. And I'd made mistakes, there's no question, but I'd go back. But when it come to the building and maintenance, he never got involved in that because that's what he never did. So I was very lucky, I think, because my extensive background, I was able to do all of that. But the budgeting, for working out a budget for the studios and how much a film's going to cost coming in, how's it going to cost us to maintain it, he started to show me that years earlier. So eventually I'd do the budget for the whole year. So then he'd oversee it, make sure I got it right. And then, but the maintenance side, he never got involved in it. So, but the day he told me that, because then he's always dealt with the board. He's dealt with Graham and the Kirby's. I've never had to do that. And he'd go over and it was like, oh no.
So what, for those 2 days that are before the Monday, what's going through your head? Are there concerns about any particular obstacles you know you're going to have to face? Or was it just a continuation of the theme of, you know what, I'll see where this takes me and I'll apply myself? Was there any kind of self-doubt or fear?
Well, yeah, because I've never had to deal with a village board. I've never had to go in a meeting where there's 12 of them around a table, because I've never done it before. I've done meetings on the executive level.
Sure.
And that was the only thing going, what are they going to ask me? Are they going to come up with something? Now I was like, I can do this, just breathe, you'll be fine, it's okay, you've been doing it for a while, Michael's handed over the reins to you, and you know, and then I very clearly remember the first board meeting and I was just going, oh my God, it's like, I don't know what they're going to ask me. And
how did you carry yourself through that? What was that experience like for you internally?
I was having a party on the inside. It was like, you know, you need to, because when I get nervous, I talk quite fast. Yeah. And then people can't understand me because my accent gets worse. Yeah. So it's quite entertaining, but it's like, and I'd done it for so long, and Michael had the faith in me, which was fantastic. And he knew, and I knew I could do it, but he'd always done that next level. So, and then traveling to LA, which I do, well, not at the moment, but I started traveling to LA. I did it a few times when Michael was still in LA. I was able to still go over, so I'd started to network with all the clients over there.
Can I ask you about that? Because there's the one thing of keeping the facility running and organising budgets and ensuring that the administrative end of it is functional, but the politicking of nurturing filmmakers and nurturing studios and making sure that the sound stages are active, that there's content coming into the state, into the country. That's a whole other machine, right? Reporting back to a board is a whole other machine.
Yeah.
And it all has its own way of working. What was that process like for you when you started to move into the politics of movie making?
Because I'd dealt with a lot of the clients, because when Michael used to travel to LA, back then he was going like 5 times a year. And unfortunately in LA, a lot of people are quite transient. They move around from different jobs to jobs. But there was always, like at Warner's, back then there was Steve Papazian and Bill Draper. Disney, which is the same people I've known for 30 years, are still there. But going there, and it's quite funny because the city of Gold Coast had a film division, and Screen Queensland used to come as well, and we'd all go like as a team. But you'd always have to be on your toes when you go in there. It was quite interesting if you didn't know them. How can you sell a shed, which is basically what I'm selling? And it's all based on incentives. So if the incentive is not there, people won't come no matter how amazing we are. And we have got an amazing reputation. Nearly every film comes to me first to look at, well, we need the studio, can we get in? But going over there, it's because you have to, on average, you do about 20 meetings a week if you did it in the week, and you might have a dinner with some clients, but you'd start, 8, 9 in the morning. And driving, I learnt from driving and doing Michael's itinerary where Burbank is as opposed to Santa Monica, that it might look short on a map, but when you actually get in the car, it's an hour and a half, not 20 minutes.
Can I just ask you in that space, because obviously now with the studios established as they are, and we could spend hours just talking about the projects that have come through the doors and that are continuing to come through. And I imagine the more that those projects come in and are successfully conducted, that word spreads and the doors open up more freely when you're overseas. But in that initial period, was it a harder sell?
Yeah, because there were the incentives there, and the dollar, at one point the dollar was parity, so people just weren't coming. Then there was the writer's strike in LA for 18 months and there was nothing, absolutely nothing. So you are riding and at the mercy of a lot of factors that can come into it. But everybody, all of them over there who know me really, really well. And I remember with Pirates of the Caribbean, we pitched for probably 8 years to get one of those movies here. And we do stop at nothing. What can we do to make it work? Can we build a new sound stage? Do you want us to, yes, you can dig the floor out. Or you want to take the door off the stage? Yeah, okay, yeah, fine, we'll have a look at it. And then when we finally got it, and it was the first big one for Disney, and I said, and then we help them sometimes look for crew. They obviously know the production managers quite well, but working with some of the companies, so we'll say, have you got a list of crew for production managers? So we'll help them do that. And as Disney said, you do go above and beyond. You're not just running a studio, you help with any. If you can't work it out, I'll find out. We had one a couple of years ago that needed we didn't have some facility we didn't have here, but I contacted TAFE up at Coomera, who was able to accommodate them, so they went up there and did some work. But I mean, I've had it where we need to dig the floor out of the stage. Oh, yeah, okay, we'll have a look at it. Yes, we can, this is how we do it. I had one with stage 8, they wanted to take the 2 ends of the stage wall off to make it longer, and then cut holes in the side of the stage. So when I got to a point about 2 million, I did point out that having the holes in the side of the stage wall probably won't be very soundproof, but the cost is. But then we did the water tank with fool's gold. They needed a tank, they funded it, and we built it, and built it to spec. Can
I just ask you in that space, you were saying 8 years to woo Pirates of the Caribbean. That tenacity that you obviously have in there to not surrender after year 2, year 3, year 4, and say, you know what, that one's just lost. So what drives that in you when you say, okay, well, we'll just keep this up until we have a win?
And I think it's because, I wish I could answer that question, but it's more that the crew get work, because that's in my mind as well. And we're like the pond, we're the little stone that starts in the middle. So they've got the incentives. They're coming down to the studio here, then I know it will employ all the crew, then it'll employ all the local businesses. So, and it's nice to see them all being employed as well. But if I know there's a film that I've heard of, I'll contact them, bring it down here, what can we do? What can we do to make it work? Okay, it's not enough money, we'll negotiate this deal, let's do it this way, and we do it that way, and I'll stop at nothing. And they all know I'm dealing with them all the time. I will stop at nothing to try and get that film.
That's the thing I just find fascinating, that fire in you.
Yeah.
Which obviously hasn't faded.
No, and and it's hard sometimes because I'll be dealing with them, and I say, look, it's highly likely it's not going to come, but why? Well, it's just the director doesn't want to come here, or the actor can't get here because of his time shift. Well, what do we need to do to make it? So I get disappointed because think, oh, we've tried for so long, and tried for so long to get them, and I put my heart and soul into it. And I know when I deal with Disney and Warner's and Netflix now and Paramount, they all know me so well. So when I don't get it, and I go, oh, I understand. Like Marvel, like when Disney bought Fox in Sydney, I knew, because they own Marvel and Lucasfilms, and obviously we did Thor here, and I knew they were going to do another Thor. And I thought, great, maybe there's a chance it will come here. And then when I heard Disney bought Fox in Sydney, I was devastated. And I emailed them and said, it breaks my heart knowing that I might never get you back now after finally getting you here after all these years. But they just, never say never. Because if we're busy like we're doing now, there's opportunities all over the place. Yeah. But they always everybody reaches out to me and, have you got the space? Where can we go? Where can we find? And working with City of Gold Coast with the film division, Screen Queensland, we found a couple of warehouse spaces, which has just happened with the Netflix one and Ron Howard one.
Was there a period where you can remember feeling like I've got my straps, like I've got this now at a run? Once you went through that period of transition into the role, was there a chapter where you thought, I think this is now starting to take, and I'm going to find myself committing all these decades to it, no more hopping around? Was there a period where you just thought, this feels like I've got this?
No. I can't explain why I'm here 30 years. I think because it is so varied, no day is the same.
You've never been bored?
No. I mean, when we had the writer's strike for 18 months and there was nothing, I was absolutely so bored, it was ridiculous. But it's always so different. And we have had gaps where there's been 6 months at times when the movie hasn't started when it's supposed to.
In that space then, for people that don't understand how that works, when there's seemingly nothing happening, what is happening in terms of what's going on behind the scenes to kickstart activity?
So even like we, obviously with Baz Luhrmann being here, and even though I've got a film, even when we had Marvel, I'm still then looking at the next year. I'm always way ahead. I'm into next year, and I've been in next year for a long time. So if we get a project in, I advise everybody I deal with, this is what they booked. But again, it's driven by the incentive and the dollar. If that doesn't go right, it doesn't matter what I do, they won't come. Right. So we've been very lucky for 6 years. Again, with Thor and Pirates of the Caribbean, San Andreas and Broken, The Shallows. We've been very, very lucky. We're literally rolling in and rolling out. And then the Commonwealth Games. So I knew we were dealing with Thor at the time, and they wanted a 40,000 foot warehouse space. Yeah. And I knew the games were doing boxing here and squash. Yes. And then they were going to build some other facility, and I kept contacting council saying, give me the building. We can then diversify, it can be used for anything. So it's not just going to be stuck for one sport, it can be, and then it wasn't going to happen. And I kept going back to them saying, over probably 4 months, I kept nagging the nightmare out of them, saying, give it to us, we can use it. Marvel's going to come, they want a 40,000 foot square space. So they're not going to come in after the games. And then one day they rang me and said, have we got a deal for you? We're going to give you 11 million. Wow. And we'll base squash here. I then had to go to Village, and I'd say, have I got a deal for you? And they used to laugh because they go there constantly saying, I've got a deal for you.
That's your
and
line.
They go, yeah, that's my line. Oh, now what's he coming up with? And I said, this is the best deal, and I need another 5.5 million. And we'll build the stage for the games. Then Marvel will use it when they come in. Fantastic. And they said, what's the catch? And I went, well, apart from you giving me 5.5,
there's no catch.
There's no catch. We get to keep the stage.
Yeah. Fantastic.
And then straight after that, Marvel moved in, and then straight after that, another film moved in, Dora moved in, and Baz is in there. So it's been fantastic.
That's a great story as an anecdote of just...
I will stop at nothing.
Yes, your tenacity and your ability to recognise that you're not trapped in a box with your thoughts. There is no box.
No.
How do we how do we make it happen?
Yeah, and it's got to make business sense as well. You have to
course.
look at it when you go and pitch it to say, well, and I've done it a few times, and it's amazing that Clark supports us on a massive scale. It's also the business sense of it. So I could build more facilities, but it's a risk because we're still at the mercy of the incentive and the dollar again. So at the moment, because of COVID, Queensland has been so successful. But again, you've got to put that package together and kind of sell it. And obviously I do quite well selling it, so but yeah.
And you obviously can't sit still, right? Because as you say, when that production is done, what's coming up the back? And if you're sitting still,
you lose the window.
Yeah. So it's always about what's the next 12 months, what's the next 2 years look like?
Yeah, and because you do it like a lot of times, because people think that we hire all the crew and we don't either. So all the crew, as I said, the productions bring in their own crew. But if I sat and waited to say, like when Bad's finished, and then I went, all right, now I've got a studio, too late.
Yeah.
You've got to think way ahead. So most of the time, because Ozfilm, which represents the whole of Australia film industry to the international market, I will email all the studios. If I've got, even when we built Stage 9, that was a major marketing coup for me, because every film like Disney has said, if you build something bigger,
right,
and then we're saying with Paramount, if you build something bigger, and Warner's, and then we did, so it's been perfect. So it's just always been way ahead. You can't wait. Commercials are a bit different, because commercials sometimes tend to be short and fast, and I always can pick the time of the year that they'll start reaching out to us, and having the 3 water tanks here has been a help. But now with streaming, with Netflix and Stan and all those guys, there's a whole different level of production that we can now tap into. And how can we be clever enough, either get somebody that takes the whole site, which is better for me because it's one film, but when we've had 3 films in here and anything goes wrong, they all blame each other.
Right.
Then we have to look at the cameras
to
see who might have knocked the lamppost over because they're blaming that film, not that one. Yeah, and then they all start arguing about parking. So, yeah.
There's an old saying that you sometimes shouldn't meet your heroes. I'm just wondering, without telling war stories and giving away too much, but is there anyone in particular when you look back over those 30 years that impressed you for whatever reason, that you just walked away thinking, that's an impressive person, and it shocked you, it caught you by surprise? So rather than a negative, someone that impressed you and you didn't expect it.
It's hard because people say you must meet all the actors, but unless I contact the production to say, can I go on set and can I meet them, I feel as though I'm imposing on them. And then if in the middle of shoots, or sometimes I'll be there and they'll walk past and say hello. There's been so many.
No one that had an impact where you just thought, that surprised me? I feel like I shouldn't tell a story out of school, so stop me if we can't tell it and I'll cut it out. But
well, Chris Hemsworth had he was just very genuine.
Right.
You know, if he saw you walking past, he'd always say hello. If you're on set, he'd say hello.
He's grounded.
Jason Momoa was the same. Well, for me, because I see a totally different side what the crew might say.
Sure.
But even when Jason came back from Movie World to do the Warner Brothers exhibition,
yes,
and he remembered me from a year ago.
Right.
You know, or if he'd see me out with his children, he'd say hello.
Yeah.
Angelina Jolie, when she came, because she was the director, we had to have meetings with her. The nicest person.
Right, that was Unbroken.
Yes,
yeah.
Unbroken. And even more exciting when Brad came down with the children.
Ah, there you go. I'd love to, we won't stay on this subject for long, but I just want to very quickly touch on, if you don't mind, I just love that story you told me not so long ago about Mel Gibson and his calves. Can we tell that story?
I don't know.
we can leave it there and just leave it to people's imagination.
No, because he has been out a few times, because he originally came out to scout for Hacksaw Ridge.
Yes.
And he's he's a very fit person.
Very fit.
Yeah. And he had shorts on, and we were just talking, and we had to go to the tank, and we had to go and I sometimes, and everybody knows me really well, and this is why I think they find me quite funny, that sometimes my mouth does not work with my brain.
You don't filter before you speak sometimes.
There are some very funny situations and that I've had even when I've travelled overseas, that something's come out, and they all know me so well, they're not
surprised.
No, they've lost it. And he was at the tank, and he'd come back down, and he had the shorts on, and I just turned around and said, "Oh my God, your calves are amazing." And it was like, I don't think I should have just said that.
Yeah.
But anyway, he just laughed.
And he took the compliment?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he just laughed. But yeah, I'm known for sometimes my brain does not always work with my mouth.
When you look back at that career that you've had, and again, you probably can't tell me a single moment, but is there a moment of real pride if you had to recount it and say, you know what, I'm really proud of that? Was there a single moment that you could look back at and say it stands out?
I think if I look at where the studio started with the 4 stages that we have, and then Village came aboard with the 5th one, and then project managing building stage 7 and 8, 9, the tank was a coup for me because of Fool's Gold, but 9 for me was a major coup to get it from where it was to not having anything to suddenly getting the money, getting Village to agree to it, building it that fast. We had to build it in 5 months. Was for me, every time I drive past it and I went,
yeah,
you know, I built, not literally built it, but I project managed
absolutely.
it. But we used to joke though, because you know Michael working at Movie World,
Yeah.
and you know me really, really well.
Yeah.
I always joke with group projects when we're dealing with builders,
Yeah.
and I'd say to them, have you told them what I'm like when I start? And they went, no, we're going to let them find out the hard way. And they used to watch me sometimes, and they said, yeah, your filter wasn't there when you were building soundstage, because they'd see this 5-foot pink work boots, pink hard hat, pink jacket, skirt or a dress on, going on the stage, and go, oh, she doesn't know anything. So it used to be quite entertaining. They'd just stand back and watch me, so it's very funny. But you have to, you can't, I feel it's a very male-dominated industry as well, and the challenges that I've had over the years, you have to stand your ground, but not be, what's the word to use, not nasty with it, or it's just been, I'm here to make a film and make sure they're happy. If you overstep that mark working what a film is here at the moment, then unfortunately then, you know, I'll say what I have to say.
Can we just touch on that before we get to the back end? Because I think that's an important thing, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to ask you about it, particularly for young women that might be listening as well. When you say it's a very male-dominated industry, and there's no doubt about it, you've obviously made sure that you described getting onto the site and wearing the pink boots and then having the pink umbrella, whatever it might have been, and knowing they're going to be making assumptions.
Yeah.
And then when they're dealing with you, they're just dealing with someone that knows their business and knows what they want. And it's not so much about that person's gender, it's about their character and their vision and their self-awareness. They know who they are, they know what they're about. And I know we could sit here for a long time and unpack all of that through the lifetime of your career. What advice would you give young women, particularly that are walking into an industry that may have been traditionally male-dominated, in terms of owning your truth, owning who you are, and pushing through?
It's a hard one because it's changed so much in 30 years.
It has, yeah.
And I know like there are a lot more women in film coming through now, and not just in the film industry, just in general. The building industry has its own mechanism, and it's just sticking to your ground and being confident in yourself. And I've got a side of me that I might not be confident about, but I don't let that come through when I'm dealing with a certain issue or what I have to do. And it's like, well, if you don't like it, then I can't work with you. But I've had people say you have a very good knack of doing it. They've watched me on how I managed to get them to think. Or if I give an example with production, with my staff, if it gets too curly, I said, I'll go out and deal with it. Once they said, don't worry, Lynne will come and talk to you. They go, oh no, it's okay, it's fine. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. And I don't know whether it's because I worked in engineering with 300 guys on a shop floor.
Yeah, there you go. Probably.
Being bullied at school.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's all came to it to go, if I don't stand my ground, and we're all human at the end of the day.
But all those layers from childhood of the foundations of your character.
Yeah.
So it all has value.
Yeah.
Last question, and thank you for sharing so much in the time we've had. What drives you still after 30 years? What excites you?
Yeah. Don't know.
Is there
I
a
can't
thi-
believe I've just gone totally silent and can't come up with a...
It's the same two questions I asked whenever I'm finishing. Was
You
the
did.
about the
It's
proudest
just-
moment, and then what still gets you motivated?
I look, and it's like every job, you have moments when you go, oh, what am I doing?
Sure.
And I think that's just normal and part of life. You have days sometimes where you I just don't want to do it anymore. But it's the thrill of the chase of getting the film. So even though, like, I know with Baz, I used to film in Sydney, and there's certain producers, directors that I don't ever pitch for because they just don't want to come to Queensland. So when that opportunity arose, it was like, it's amazing.
Yeah.
You know, when Disney came out, it's the thrill of the chase.
Yes.
Knowing I can email the Netflixes and the Disney and the Warners and say, have you got anything coming up? Let's start talking. What can we do? What package can we put together? It's just that thrill. And then when I get them in, and it's like a family, because if you think most of them can be here for nearly a year, and you interact with them so much, and then when they leave, it's actually quite sad. You kind of go, oh, they've all gone now, and then okay, next one comes in. I say to my staff, and even though it's not your fault, it's still your fault. And even if it is your fault, it's still your fault. And if it's not your fault, it's still your fault. And you just say, don't worry, we'll fix it, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
But I think, it's hard to be motivated after 30 years, but I think because it's so different every time.
Yeah.
It's like, can we expand? What do we need to do? Have I got a film coming looking at the big tank?
Yeah.
We have to start getting that ready and how it's going to work. You know, we have to. So, and I know how the tanks work really well. I've seen some massive disasters because they don't listen to us.
Sure.
And there's another whole story on that
Yeah.
line. But motivation is just like, it's just different every day.
Great
It's
way
a
to
challenge.
finish.
Yeah.
Different every day and still a challenge after 30 years.
Yes, so they always joke I'll be 95 and still in my wheelchair wheeling around.
Calling the shots.
Yep, don't park there and don't park there. The parking is my pet hate. I always say to people, don't make me come out and tell you about parking.
It's been a great hour. Thank you for making time here on Park Life. Really enjoyed it.
You're welcome.
I hope you enjoyed this latest episode. You'll find Park Life on Twitter and me, Michael Croker, on Instagram at Mike_Croker. See you next time.